Good evening. Happy Friday to everybody. Happy St. Patrick for those of you who are looking for an excuse to drink. It's always a good excuse for that. This has been a busy week with a lot of things going. And today we have a wonderful event. We are here to present, and there will be other parts, I'll get to that in a minute, the latest book of Morphosis, Thom Mayne, called I don't know how to say that in English. 3 times, which also means matters, apparently. I was thinking, books, why books matter. I found this very funny quote that I think is interesting from Melanie White that says, one advantage reading books has over TV is that you can read books and do other things at the same time. Books have this capacity to capture your attention, and that's why I think, despite that the death of books has been announced multiple times, they remain alive and well and keep surviving and keep mattering, and it has a presence. Many months ago, when I was a student in New York, Bernard Tschumi introduced Thom Mayne in a lecture, I think it's 1999, and Bernard Tschumi mentioned at that time that Thom Mayne was the most published architect in the world. I think that still remains truth. But aside that, I cannot think of any architect that is more committed to the production of books than Thom Mayne. And these are not just books, these are physical entities that exercise their process by themselves. They carry weight in the same way that buildings carry weight, or drawings and models. This is a book about models. It's about the book of almost 50 years of work through models. They all play a different role over time. This is also a book, like others that Thom has done in the past, that open up to invite many other people to participate. This one, I think, it has a very kind of a family reunion biography quality. And the issue of biography is an interesting one, because I think there is something really remarkable to mention. Somebody who invests that time in producing books and the stability and the permanence that the book produces, which is almost like you're building a biography in chapters. Like every 2 or 3 years, a book comes out, and you summarize a period of time in your life, and then there comes another one and another one. And the work is not finished by any means, and the work will continue. But I think there is something really important, in particular in the culture of architecture and the culture of how we operate, which is the ability that you produce the work, but also you're trying to do autopsy and a criticism of the work, and you start to establish what are the parameters in your own voice, and not necessarily wait by critics or other people will say. You try to create the whole narrative of the work. And the work is never as simple as it's a building, or it's a drawing, or it's a model, or it's a book. Is the coagulation of all that. And there is something that I think it has distinguished always Morphosis and Thom Mayne, is the capacity of what I will call the hypercoherency. There is a desire that all the pieces need to fit. A drawing at some point, or a model at some point, were the project. They are not just a representation of something that will happen later. They were the thing. Now, those things change over time, and as we know, the logic of the work, of the growth, or the mutation by now is taken in different ways. But I think in these times in which we seem sometimes trapped in a culture of immediacy, when we see the effort and the commitment to the production of a book, I'm not saying that the book and building are the same thing. What I'm saying there are different phases and different logic of a notion of durability, a notion of a presence that will sustain the process of time. And I think when somebody commits to that, I really think it's a gift to everybody, even for those who agree, or the ones who disagree. But there is an evidence and there is an analysis of a work. So in that sense, I think it's a remarkable thing to celebrate not this particular book only, but the notion of the commitment to that, the notion of the production of culture, architecture as a cultural practice. So I really think it's a fantastic thing to be celebrating, and that's how I see it today. It's a celebration, anything else. So the way that the evening will go is Thom will speak. He says that he's going to try to make it in 20 minutes. We'll see about that. But it's okay. It's Friday night. What else we have to do? As we know, architects, our social life is not that good. So Friday night, talking about architecture, discussing books, ideas, seems like a better way to spend the night than doing other things. I always think when I see a room full like this on a Friday night, I say, oh, our social life needs some revision. But the way that it will go, Thom will talk a little bit, and then he will be joined by Marcelyn, who is one of our undergrad program chair, John Enright, and also the partner at Servo, John Enright, which is the Vice Director and Chief Academic Officer here at SCI-Arc, and partner at Griffin Enright. And in the last minute, and we want to be very thankful to Andrew Zago, the step in to replace Michael Rotondi, who unfortunately is not feeling well tonight, and Andrew Zago will be this. So there is a little bit of family reunion thing. I know that Andrew was involved in this, and John worked for a while in Morphosis. So Marcelyn will have kind of a family therapy role kind of thing. So I'm curious to see how that's going to play out. But nevertheless, I really think it's a joyful day. I cannot think any better way to celebrate St. Patrick than in doing this. So without further ado, Thom Mayne.
Eric, I moved out the podium so I don't have the light to be in my eyes. You remember that one? I've been really looking forward to coming tonight, actually. And that a huge amount of people that were writing in this document are here, of course. Even closer? Huh, that different? Oh, okay. And it's not a lecture. It's just a kind of a chat, kind of a talk that'll start, hopefully, a conversation that'll take us someplace. Hernán was talking about the nature of the book, and it reminded me to start with, and it'll be the first image we look at. It is about protecting your voice and about projecting your own kind of ideals. And in a field that's very difficult in that manner, you're defined by other people, and the work is somewhat contaminated, or it's connected to various realities. And the work that's it represents in this book represents the ideas and the aspirations that begin the conversation. And it's funny, it came about in the most kind of casual way, like a lot of things do. The Wolf Pricks of Coupe Blau had sent me a document of his drawings. It's this huge document that's an archival document, really, of all the sketches he ever did. It was sitting at my desk, and Hallie Black, my director in my office, was looking at it and said, Thom, why don't you do the same thing in models? The model has been kind of emblematic of your work for years, where the Morphosis model is even understood as some sort of an idea. And we started this thing, and it was going to be just a kind of an archival project. It was nothing kind of particularly interesting. And then we were going to ask a few people to write something, and that it kept kind of growing, and then finally there's 150-some voices. It ended up being much more of a conversation than a dialogue about the role of the model, and it becomes, to me, extremely interesting at this point of history, and that I'm a cusp character. And again, there's several people in this room that would be, if you're a certain age, I'm looking at Moss in front of me, that we've moved from a classical architectural training. We started with drawing and models and the hand and a very kind of personal notion of working through the digital age in 1994. And it changed hugely the way we think and proceed in our architectural work. Well, the first work, and I'm showing it in chronology because I think that's extremely important, was, and again, I'm speaking to the students here, and I want to be the most kind of optimistic, because you're starting and you have basically no work. And it's extremely kind of small scale, and there's a problem of just realizing, let's say, that constructing a work. And so the first thing that you'd want to know, or that'd be interesting, is that these projects were the work, right? And we understood it as that, right? And so if they're aestheticized, or if they're produced in a certain way, they were the product of the energy of the studio at the time. And then on another level, you're producing things, And it takes you someplace that you're not even intending to do in the beginning. We're building a fragment of this residence, and we're building a kind of an area that has a certain kind of intensification, where we've invested in design, et cetera. We build the fragment, and then all of a sudden out of that, we look at this thing, and it takes us someplace, and we start discussing a notion that the fragment is, in fact, much more interesting than the project that we're thinking about. And it's taking us in a very, very different direction, which is leading us to, it's challenging our conceptual notion of architecture. And in this case, it's challenging very basic notions of organization and classic organization, certainly Palladian classical organization, a part whole. And we're trying to develop notions of a very different notion of organization that has to do with a different notion of the relationship of the part and the whole as an idea. And it's manifesting in the 6th Street house. Ooh, this is out of place. Ooh, sorry. That's leading us to this. And so we're now looking at a kind of a piece of work that comes out of that has to do with this idea of kind of multiple organizations, multiple narratives that produce the work. And then simultaneous to that, and this is early in the practice, I'm not sure I'm in my mid-30s, late 30s, it allows you to do work through competitions and to explore, or it's the evident kind of end product of a work that has to do with work that's going to be way in front of you in terms of realization, that you're going to approach 20 years from now, that you're going to have an opportunity to do this work, and I'm going to end with that. And again, it's going to start establishing, and the model again is an integrative tool, that you're looking at something that integrates all the various kind of parameters, conceptual, et cetera. And in this case, we're working in Vienna, and the competitions are starting to lead us to other competitions. We're starting to get involved in that kind of world. And in this case, it's started leading us to a very different idea of ground and building, and the whole notion of the activization of groundscape, et cetera, which is going to be very, very much part of the work for years to come. And again, in a competition in LA that we won. And here we are winning a competition. It's not going to get built, but it's pursuing something that's going to happen 20 years in the future. We're practicing. We're warming up for something, right? And at the same time, we're advancing ideas. And we're advancing, the model is representing something that's has some connection to reality, and that it's very kind of finished as an idea, because it's being presented now at the end of a competition. It is the work. And again, in a competition for the Spraybogen Government Center, and again, we're now pursuing ideas of landscape, and it's clarifying certain conceptual interests that are going to stay with us. So when we get to Chiba, where the landscape is now playing a major role, and these models are becoming absolutely essential in kind of understanding the resultant of this thinking as they're in somewhat completed form. And then they take various forms. So you'll see a lot of the work we're doing kind of multiple. We remodel it and remodel it again, and through the building process, the construction process, we're responding in a reiterative process, right, to what we've done, and we keep refining it, and then there are different forms. Eric, you and I were in the same show when we presented this in a little funky gallery over in Culver City, and it's going to become the school, and it's accentuating certain elements that we're interested in this project. That's now going to be this and this, that turns into this. And then again, in the Hoopa Bank, we're looking at something that's kind of very complete, that it's something that's really documenting what's going to become the final project. And we're evaluating kind of where we are at this time to make changes. It's a method of understanding kind of where we are in a very complex project, that it's going to take us here. And then there was a change taking place. John, this is just where we were, right? at. And we're starting to get larger projects and more complex projects and projects that are vastly more performative. And it's really starting to change our notion of, it's changing my notion of who I am as an architect. And I'm moving away from thinking myself as a designer, and I'm having to help with some people. And if the projects get at this scale, you become much more of a thought leader, and you're broadening your interests because they have to do now with highly performative kind of projects, both in pragmatic terms and in terms of in political, economic, social terms, et cetera. And then what happened with this first, we just got the Z Corp. I think, if I remember right, we were the first architect to buy this machine. And we're putting together these first models, and it was absolutely startling what's taking place. Because all of a sudden, there's an immense amount of information showing up very early in your ideas, and you're starting to bind together the various complexities of the pragmatics of that you have to solve, and the definition of the problem as an architect, and the conceptual formation that's guiding these decisions that's leading to this. And the amount of information, the complexity of the ideas is ramping up radically, and the computer came at the perfect time to deal with this, right? And it's radically changing our notion of the traditional notions of the role of the model and the role of drawing. And I should have said, they're now de-aestheticized. And what's taking place, and you'll find in your practice, is that the model is less kind of important in defining you, as the nature of your interests artistically, and it's now much more connected to the reality of the various performances that this thing has to take. And then with that, something is taking place, which is valid to today, is it's really, it's accentuating the reiterative process. And it's necessary for the type of clients you're getting as they become more complicated. This is the courthouse in Eugene, where we're going to produce dozens of schemes that deal with the complexity of the client or clients and the nature of the complexity of the problem that's going to lead to this. That started with his interest in a very classical kind of idea what a courthouse is. And it's quickly now kind of advancing into something more specific, that as we look at now fragments of this building, that we can look at it's in scalar terms. And so now we're going to look at because he's interested in the courthouse, and he's interested in very precise notions of how this building operates, and is kind of quickly able to do that. That gets us to this and this. And then again, kind of beginning ideas for a project in Cincinnati. And drawing and model are starting to glue together. So we're giving them a document, a book about the project, and it includes now the three-dimensional. And of course now as a presentation tool, it's something very literal. And it's going to be extremely useful for a client that understands it even in this abstract form. And it's a synthesizing tool. Right, and it's going to be useful for your argument, for the completion of an idea, for a group of people that are going to be less informed and less interested in your particular conceptual interests, right? That's going to be this. And then, of course, the computer radically advanced the diversity of form making. And things that were incredibly complex 10 years ago, 10 years before this, are now actually kind of basic in your work. And again, you can produce in a very rapid time. And again, this to me would be extremely important today. It is getting more so that you're, when you leave this place, you're going to be doing very complex competitions, and you get 6 weeks or 8 weeks. And it's not that it's the way to do it. It's just the way it exists. There's no choice, right? You have to operate in that sense. And you're now, the model is now becoming a representative of the current ability to use technology. For me, it's Hubble. You look at the sky on a clear day and you see a couple dozen stars, and that's your perception of the universe. You look out of Hubble and it's a couple billion, and it's a solid field mesh, right? And these are just tools that allow us to advance our understanding of complex issues, right? And in this case now, I have a tool that in 5-6 weeks, I can develop a complex of 3 theaters and put those in form, and it's just necessary for the nature of how we get work through competitions, et cetera. And of course, this is old school for you, but it's moving from, it's much more connected to the speed your own brain works in the early stages, that you're working at a very quick pace. And the problem in traditional architecture has been the tediousness of the mechanics of realizing those ideas. And again, form is now free, and in a way you can kind of relax about it, because you can produce, it opens you up to infinite, basically, possibilities, and you're now operating within those terms. And again, going back even to the first notions of intensification, we're looking at projects and deciding certain things have to do with certain intensification. If you can very quickly take a somewhat vague conceptual idea and put it within physical terms, where it's operating within gravitational forces, et cetera, right? And it's starting to connect to the possibility of an architecture. And we're constantly looking at different methods of the model. I didn't mention, but at the very beginning, the models were always seen as autonomous and somehow their own entities and connected to the work. And that's kind of remained an interest. And so we're constantly looking at different methods of models, and it's just a way of looking at things outside of the huge numbers of forces that are going to form it, having to do with the contingent world. And it's going to produce this. And then some things are taking place that are moving conceptually, and that the interest that started in multiple narratives and multiple systems that make up one thing, and it's made up of relationships and not objects, the focus is the connection of things and the invention of things that come through combinatory behavior. And it's now conceptually moving to something much more kind of radical, and the computer's allowing us to do this as we can produce much more varied kind of forms. And what's happening, and this is kind of enormous now, and it's, I think, still in works, drawing and model are becoming more similar. So that the three-dimensional drawing, which is a representation of a physical thing, which is the model, and the drawing now in the upper left is a CAT scan, and it's free. You're looking at it for very particular notions of how a section or a plan is useful to you, right? And it's coming later in the process. And there's another thing that took place here that was huge, is that the drawing and the model come together, and with that you can crawl into this thing you made, and you can understand it perceptually versus conceptually, right? And it's gluing together these processes, which have huge impacts on the creation of something, on your own creative act and how you produce something. And then again, very kind of straightforward things where you're looking at something that identifies the kind of the intensity of person project, which is the social space. And then we could look at that in very kind of particular ways very early. And we're convincing a client that we have defined the problem in a proper way. This is Cooper Union, and it's about interaction of students, and it's about producing a vertical piazza, and it has to do with convention of the university and notions of that convention. And then again, and this is going to continue, and it is very much radical in the practice today, the notion of the intensification and the ability to put together complex things directly connect to construction. When we're getting more and more involved in construction, and I would say for your generation, you're going to be builders, and you're going to draw less versus producing the thing itself as part of your work. And again, that has to do with the ability of both the computer and the digital world in terms of information, and its ability to form that, to concretize that. And it allows us to do this. And then again, the reiterative process, something that allows you to look at huge numbers of options, right, that get you to a project. And again, this connection between drawing and model and the intersperse between the model seen as a digital thing, however you want to talk about this, as a non-physical thing, and the physical model, it's starting to throw into question in a much more precise way why you build models and what you're looking for, how that's useful to you, right? And again, it's leading you directly to this, that you're more and more, you're literally producing the thing itself and not a representation of the thing. And again, that's an enormous kind of shift that's taken place over the last couple of decades that allows you to do this, and you can operate Scalar. So we're developing models, both digital and physical, of a complex skin that has no part that's the same, and that every element of this piece is differentiated. And again, in the Bloomberg building, somebody that just documents that. And then the Orange County, the museum we just finished, a model, and in some ways, we're still kind of, I'm linked to kind of a convention, and I myself am fascinated with the model as a thing. And again, part of it is just something you can control and you own, and it represents your own aspirations, et cetera. And well, after a while, we started understanding very early on that we can look at inside and outside, and these models can be very useful as you keep reinventing kind of what they are. But they're, again, a question mark that we're doing this, and this is the current world we live in. And now we're starting to really talk about kind of how is this useful in terms of our own design thinking and kind of where we're taking a project, how we're kind of operating on this thing vis-a-vis the model. And they both have very different kind of specific uses, right? In terms of how they're useful to get you to the thing itself. And then again, you can look at the kind of the total thing itself, a project at Cologne Research Center, and seeing it in its somewhat idealized form at some point. And then now the ability of moving from macro to micro is now completely institutionalized within the group. And we can operate at a scale of the facade, and we're taking responsibility for making something that doesn't exist. And it's a seamless kind of process of doing this, right? And I think it's a really interesting way as thinking about things. Your brain doesn't think hierarchically. I think most of us have some similarity that I'll think of a door handle or something that's micro at 1 minute, and I'll think of something that has to do with a broad sight idea, and they come at whatever they come in your head. And what's so fascinating, I find, with what's going on today, is you can do that. Where John, we're doing Cape Madalini, it's a very rigid process of thinking through a big thing and finally getting to a detail. And today it has nothing to do with that. You can operate micro, macro, and it's interspersed. And that alone, I think, has an effect of how you think about design, right? That allows you to think in a much less hierarchical way. And again, we can take responsibility for this that goes directly to this. And it literally becomes part of the activity of the office that this is part of now the design activity, and it's expanding our services, right? And that's going to go to the prototype of the piece before it's built. And we're producing these prototypes. And then the same idea being used for the interior, where it's a research group in Korea, in Seoul, which produces tech fabrics at your airbag, that kind of thing. And we're now using their fabric in the same kind of way. We're doing that for this interior space. And so, something else is happening. And it's supposed to be about models. And in this thing, I couldn't get away from this because you can't separate the activity of again, the creative activity that you're using, you still call this drawing, and models. And now I'm pursuing this idea of organizational ideas, but it's moving way more towards chance behavior and operations that have to do with willfulness and chance. And it's going to go back to it'd be a separate kind of conversation. It'll start with Duchamp, and it's going to start with randomness and organizing randomness, organizing what apparent disconnectedness, right? And And the models now are much more kind of, they're moving this into the material world, into something much more the realistic world, having to do with all of the kind of pragmatics of the building that are again now translating much more literally kind of an idea. And again, I'm making a direct connection between the drawings as an idea and their effect on an organizational idea, which has to do with the looking for a new notion of coherence of organization. And these are just now proving that. And simultaneously, you're working with the nature of the reality of that idea. And you're producing and you're taking responsibility for that. And in this case, having to do with the nature of the structure. And that's going to lead to, again, something that's highly variable, where there's going to be a couple thousand parts that are all different, which today is seamless in terms of construction. That's going to take you here. So literally every meter of a project that's about, 600 meters long, there's no place that's self-similar. And every element is connected to nature in various ways. And it has to do with that. But this one connected to nature, we're looking for a new prototype between landscape and architecture. This one being more urban, and now we're looking for a kind of an urban idea that has to do with public space. And we won the competition because we're the only team that was interested in producing a public connected space versus a series of objects. And it had to do with the social connection of a very large workforce of E&I. It's just their research center. And again, from conceptual models to now much more kind of finished models that we're now kind of evaluating where we are at a particular point in time, and we're bringing the client along with us to get us this. And when you go through the process, the scale's moving up radically as we continue this work, and you're trying to understand yourself, if this is useful, the meaning of that scale in your work as you're producing the work. And you kind of have to go through the process, because I was just here and it wasn't quite what I thought it was, and I'm learning myself. I'm still trying to understand the nature kind of understanding kind of the work we're doing as it reaches the scale, and this complexity. And I'm evaluating back to that model becomes that's my datum still that I can look at myself and kind of understand. And again, I'm looking for, like all of our work, pieces of work that represent maximizing diversity, maximizing the condition of an historic city over time, and all the collisions and the accidents and the occurrences that have spatial implications that produce the interest and the vitality of those cities, most of them being accidental, not the planned ones, the ones of collisions and accidents, et cetera, that I find the most interesting. And it's, again, the interest is in spatial differentiation, spatial organization. And like what I've been talking about in many of the projects, it's scalar. So those same things take you down to every piece. And it's, I'm interested finally in bringing the handmadeness, the human connection to construction into the work. And again, you get an idea of the scale. And now I have to say, I go back to that model myself and look at it and rethink kind of what I'm looking at and what I was talking about and how that's useful for our next work. And whether the whole validity, in a way, of the model itself versus other methods of looking at the project. And then I've been continuing this idea of chance behavior and willfulness and chance. And the models now are completely conceptual, and they're looking for pursuing ideas of organizing complex behavior spatially and organizationally, and using extremely explicit rules. And I've been fascinated with certain notions of music, especially in jazz, and people like a Miles Davis, that as the music gets more and more complex and as it gets more apparently random, you increase the rules. it needs an incredible amount of discipline to do this, because this is made out of just 4 pieces, and I'm looking at variations. And then out of that comes, they're spatial, and I see these as 3-dimensional drawings, because we work now 3-dimensionally, and so they're nothing more but a 3-dimensional drawing, but they're allowing me to move to this. They're helping me in organizing projects. So this is a competition we won for a park in Beijing, and is a direct connection, obviously, between kind of those studies and what's taking place here. And again, in Ningbo, a series of pavilions, and there's again a direct relationship. And some of these last ones, I'm aestheticizing them purposely. Don't ask me why. I just, I still have this great love for this thing that will never happen the way it's shown here. And I'm kind of going back and looking at these, and I can't explain it. There's just some sort of love affair. I'm still, these belong to us, and they're kind of unaffected. And again, you could talk to any kind of architect over 40, and the contingent world is dangerous, and it attacks certain basic kind of things you're interested in. And this allows the key. And then a current competition we just won for a theater complex in China. And again, the model becomes just the idealization of the beginning of a piece of work. And then I wanted to end. Ricardo, are you here today? No? Oh shoot! I thought you were going to be here. I thought I would. This is Ricardo Rodriguez, a student of mine a couple years ago, and I thought I would end with this slide. Or I think there's one more. Yeah, in that. It continues in my interest in teaching. And today, again, you can look at these enormous numbers of reiterations, and you have this incredible kind of horsepower on the tools you have today, that the model becomes an extremely kind of useful. I'm talking to the choir here, I understand that. But again, it would be with this that doesn't happen far enough from my sense is it needs more. The performative has to be included within the formal. And that's, I think, what's taking place today, which is radically different if you're talking to someone that's done this for 5 generations, for 5 decades, is that we have the ability to connect an enormous amount of information, which is going to connect to the social, cultural, political world, and to the demands of architecture, especially as it becomes more complex, larger scale, et cetera. And it's the formal association, the connection between those ideas as they serve something. That's my chat. Thanks.
So where do we start? Thom, you said this is about preserving your voice. I thought that was really, really an important reflection. You know, when I saw the book, I love the fact that it kind of went against the grain of the convention we're used to of seeing the long form essay, the work, a few contributors, sometimes the author reflects. And it was just really kind of stunning, the organization, the start, where you begin by talking about this moment where you and your brother are taking apart a vacuum cleaner and putting that back together and really understanding like the tectonics of that object and starting to think that through as an introduction to a way of reflecting on models. And then the other voices come in. How many, 150 voices, you said? Of the, yeah. I mean, amazing. And just the way they're also aligned with the work, that as we're looking at certain projects and the kind of reflections that contributor is making, that author, I felt like it was really an act of a kind of collective study. And it got me thinking a lot about something, I've talked to some colleagues recently, and actually one of our students, Miho, the other night on Wednesday after Eric's lecture, you know, whatever happened to the study model? The study model was this thing you would, you know, construct usually out of chipboard, you'd cut into it, you'd move things around, you'd think about various possible outcomes. And I think your book, to me, is actually presenting us with a study model. It's both a study of multiple models, but it's also revealing to us how each of those artifacts can allow us to kind of reflect on these various outcomes. And I really appreciated this evening the way you differentiated between the models that involved, like really a model tectonic, where you're making them out of sheets of material, things might be laser cut and layered, and then as that moves more toward, the slide where you were showing like the 3D printing, which is kind of often described as like a monolithic process, where it doesn't involve that same tectonic, and you even showed, the powder getting blown out of that, the thing is inside. But still, nonetheless, that becomes a sort of a site of study. So I'm just curious, maybe just to open that up and think about like that word, study model, in the context of what you presented.
Can we turn the lights on? Because we're done with the slide. I want to see people, and I still can't do it talking about it. And I purposely didn't talk about it in the book. I wanted you to come to your own conclusion. Like, we have no project. Nothing explains the project. It was purposeful. It's about the thing and what it communicates, and you have to figure it out. But what I was hoping to communicate here, that one of the things in terms of answering this, was that it's multiple purposes. And study model, check. That's one of them. And that would be kind of a basic one. And it kind of shifted radically to say to the courthouse, I could show 50-some schemes, and we're producing 3 a day over a very long period of time, which I could have never done, and I had to do to make that project work. And they're definitely a study model at a certain conceptual level that's telling us even where we're going to move in the project. And other ones, like the very first project, is the work. The Venice 3, well, we happen to build it, but it represents who we are as a studio, right? And we were, that Venice 3 house, it got built, and this is for you guys, because it's hopefully super optimistic. We wanted, and I'm not bragging, I'm just saying this was as part of the story, we won the first award AIA that year for that project. And there was only one award given for the award, and it was this little house. And I was presented by Cesar Pelli, and he had gotten another award, and he presented it, and in his presentation, he said, this is interesting, we've given this project, this little tiny little thing, the first award, and the award I got was for this huge hospital. My travel budget for my fee was bigger than the cost of the house. That's what you get to do. Luckily, we're in a territory where people still value pure ideas and thinking and creativity. That's a savior when you're young, right? And so you can produce these little things, and we were highly aware of that, right, when we were together, for sure. Yeah, we were, the drawings, I remember discussing 6th Street, we're separating drawings and buildings here. I don't separate them, it's kind of hard, they kind of come together. I remember talking about building. We're constructing drawings at that time, and those drawings were who we were as architects. That was the end product, and I was totally clear at that time, there was no way we're going to build that house, right, et cetera, and it was going to be our thing, and it is the communication of our ideas. So again, it can be from product, and it is the thing you do, and for a lot of young people, that is what will happen. Your first work will be, right, it'll be in the form of drawing or model or something, right, and then later it becomes something else. And now it has many, many intentions based on how you use it. Or at the very end now, I'm going to go, you tell me when we're moving through the space at Orange County and doing the model, I'm asking, I actually changed the design with the video, and I saw things perceptually that I didn't see looking at it through models and drawings, that I saw, this thing is not, when I really entered the building in a certain way, I'm now seeing it in a human view, I'm walking through it, and I'm going to change things in that. And it became an incredible design tool, and we were thinking about it as a presentation tool to the client. And it does make you kind of reconsider, so I'm going to build a model, why am I building that model? What am I looking at that's promoting my idea? That's actually, going back to study model, what is it that I'm looking at that is part of the project, right? That I'm embedded in?
It's a little interesting, and I'm sorry, I don't have prepared comments.
Hopefully not.
Because I was looking at the presentation, and I was thinking, that's why the thing that I've written in there was a couple points about it that I wanted to make. And I saw it also with this evening's presentation the difference between the photographs of the models versus the photographs of the buildings. And the thing I've observed, it was kind of a running joke for a while, and probably in a lot of offices, trying to figure out whether you spent more money to scale on a model than in the actual building. Now, how do you measure it? Like, it wasn't clear what the multiple would be, right, in terms of doing that. You'd suspect, perhaps, the scale is cost per. And the thing that I saw, of course, I knew some of the models from firsthand experience. I had seen other ones, but going in particular to your studio there, when you had them all out there very densely, maybe even more so than they were a couple of weeks ago, I was just taken by the scalar. I write about relative density, the density of the model compared to the density of the building, that somehow the models seem to be unbearably heavy and dense and complex. Like they're going to sink into the earth, like, you know, or they're going to be like a black hole. And then, of course, the buildings are very complicated, they're very intense, but they breathe, that there's a kind of breath to the building. And what I find interesting about the models, there's something, and I mean this as a compliment, there's something slightly ominous about them. And I think this goes from the early models to the later ones, to the abstract ones, to the study models, that there's this kind of gravitas to it that's quite interesting, and it has a parallel in the buildings, but it seems to have its own life. And even seeing the photographs of the building, like, I love to look at the models. I would hate to be inside of any one of them. And then when I see the buildings, it's actually not like you're inside the model. And I don't quite know how you managed to do that, but I do think of that as a kind of singular
that's actually,
architectural
we were heavily criticized in the earlier work for overly complex work. And I remember Richard Weinstein at the time and talked to me and said, Tom, you need bigger work. It doesn't work for a little cafe or a residence. And I think he was correct, because what's happening you're talking about is that intensity is going to definitely be scalar. And so the E&I, the project in San Donato, it was going really quickly. You're showing little tiny models, and we have an organizational idea, and it's this big, and then the next time you see it, and all of a sudden that intensity, that's something I guess you learn through experience, right? And some things you learn in architecture is only through experience. It's not something, it's book learned. And exactly what you're talking about. You're making some assessment of that delta between the thing you've got in front of you and what happens when it gets this big. And definitely as it goes to the size of Donato, it's like city scale. Now it's kind of hard to even get the intensity of the model that it's on this table. It has to do with that when you get to the slide I showed you, the skins, right? But then what's taking place now, I showed you in the career building, there's now models at different scales, and we came all the way down to the model of a detail that we can talk about, a facade, et cetera. And you can do that. The thing, one of the keys is you can do that simultaneously. You're not doing it you can do that. I didn't show you the building for the far tower. We couldn't even move past to the next phase of the project without proving we could produce the building. So we had to produce the skin to even move forward. And again, you're going to find as you practice, especially on larger scale projects, that it's schematic design now. You have to have enough information to say that it's in line with the budget. Otherwise, they just stop the project.
Yeah, like
right?
early on in your work, I mean, you weren't building a lot, and there was a frustration about that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, I mean, even when we say, let's build a model, like we don't make a model, we build a model, right? Which is a kind of mimicking of building a building. Yeah. And maybe it's the next best thing. If you can't build a building, well, you got a model of it. And it seems to me that you, in the beginning, it was a kind of manifestation. Like you just said it, we had to prove that we could build it. That you had to prove, at the time, 60-year-old architect had to prove that you could build something, right. Which sounds crazy. You've built lots of stuff. Right. But still, that manifestation of a thing is its proof, as opposed to drawings, which can be fake and can be a little bit less so. So, and I wanted to wrap that comment up. I don't know if there's a question with what Marcelyn was saying, maybe about the finished quality of the models. Like there's the advent of 3D printing and all that and more iterations, but I think as the office grows and as you grow, the fetishization of the model as a product starts to go away a little bit. except now you're going back to it with your other pieces. But in other words, it really is just a thing to get
Absolutely.
to the thing.
No,
It's
and
just a tool.
we were
Whereas
really-
before it was the
yeah,
end all.
yeah.
You showed Spreebrook and that's.
We were hyper aware of that when it happened, that all of a sudden we're building buildings and the model is part of a process, right? And before, the model was our work and we were very embedded, we were embedded in the nature of the character of that thing in aesthetic terms, right? And it became very clear to us that that's no longer our products, that we get to build buildings, right? And it definitely shifted. It's funny, I don't know if you remember, were you still there we got the first machine? The first Z-Corp?
No, I left in 2000.
Because
It was
strangely
right
enough,
after
we got the Z-Corp, the automated model making.
that. Z-Corp 3D powder printer.
3D powder printer. And the people against it were all the young ones. Said, no, this is a Morphosis model. And they're like paintings and they do this. And we're going, no, but they're no longer, we're building buildings now, right? It's no longer our product, right? We now need something that operates, that's useful to us in making buildings. And with that came speed, the reality.
I'm going to beg to differ on your analysis of your own models. Because I think the book wouldn't make much sense if suddenly there was a departure of the model as a thing in of itself into being solely a tool for the execution of the building. It certainly becomes that. To my mind, the reason that you can put them together as a set is even though they had this other important, maybe extremely important life to translate into the building, they maintain a certain kind of autonomous sense. And I think that's what the density that I was trying to get at. And I think that's, it doesn't take anything away from them to acknowledge that autonomy, even though they were produced, by the dozens for practical reasons.
Yeah.
So it makes sense. It's funny, so even though the nature of them and the importance as a reflection of your practice changes, I think you can still see them, and stylistically they change, the materials change, all of that changes. I think the thing that really struck me is you can still, you see of course your work as a body of work, but you can see the models as a kind of extended meditation over the decades.
And it's funny, one of the things that happened to that I hadn't anticipated, I said at the very beginning, I thought it was just a document that was an archival document. And then we asked a group of people to write, and then more people, and it just kind of took off. And I was interested in being third person. I got the same 300 words everybody else got. And but I wanted to listen to the community, and they were very, very vastly different kind of ideas if you read the text. It's all under 300 words, you'll actually read it. You can turn the page anywhere you want, just start reading, it's okay. But finally, I looked at it, it became very, very personal. And in some ways, it's the most connected to who I am, plus or minus, as an architect, than my built work. And for the projects, what I consider myself, my most useful work never got built. And a lot of them some of them I had 7 years investment in. And so I look at it, and it's, that'd be another conversation, a model. I'm closer to that idea than I am to the work. Sometimes the work, this changed and that changed, and I don't know, I'll talk about the percentages. I've never got more than 70%. I'm being wildly optimistic of what I wanted. And that's considered pretty good, right? So they're never kind of your thing. Finally, they are, contaminated is too negative, but they're affected by the relationship of contingency. And finally, it became so personal that it's been very interesting to me looking back, that I'm literally closer to those things. That's mine. Ours always, I work collectively, but still mine in the collective sense. And it's incredibly, it's the thing that drives, it's my savior. It's where I escape. It's where I go and survive is in that world. And it became something very, very different. And I would see that might ring true with certain people, that this is kind of the genesis of your ideas that happen or don't happen in the world. And the happening part is the tough part. Getting in the ring is the hard part, right? That's the most difficult thing in architecture. You can't disappear. Well, you can if you're Levius. A few people can, but you're embedded. It requires agency, and that's the tough part. And this thing all of a sudden becomes a thing that's protected. That's why I like books. They're mine, and I don't have to fuck around with a client. And I've always had a hard time with clients. I don't have any clients here, but they wouldn't come anyway because I don't like clients. But it protects you, and I'm saying that in kind of joking because. When you work with buildings, the first thing you do is solve everything, 100%, no question about it. But it doesn't mean you like it. It's just the pragmatic part of the work. But anyway, it's private. Private in the collective sense, private of your own world, right? And it becomes incredibly important that way. And you can evaluate, is the idea more important than the thing? And it does bring up really very basic kind of notions of any artistic activity, right? Especially in architecture, which requires patronage, requires understanding. To pursue with it, you have to have a partner, right? And you have to accommodate the various utilities that it does operate within a social, cultural, political world, and that's a given, right?
That's right.
And it's also where U.S. architects, that's a whole other conversation. You'd have to discuss practicing in this country. It becomes even another conversation.
No,
the notion of your idea
is the only thing you get to build. Notwithstanding the large-scale prototyping and getting involved in building, but in the literal sense, it's the only thing you get to build as an architect.
Yeah, you have ownership, and you've protected your voice, or you have a voice, whatever. That's it.
Can I tell a funny story to wrap up? When I met you in 1986, I was a student, and we were all excited to do these models from these California architects using modeling paste. And I remember meeting Robin and Martin that year when you guys came to the PA Awards. And so we were all, using different colored paint and all this stuff. And the great Jose Obrery, who was teaching there at the time, and friend of SCI-Arc and a lot of us, walked by the studio, and one of the students said, Jose, what do you think of our work? And he said, it looks like Walt Disney threw up. Which we thought was great. We all laughed. That was fun. Anyway, thank you, Tom.
Okay.